Hey everybody, welcome back to another week of Striper Migration Reports from On the Water. My name's Matt Haeffner. I'm the assistant editor here at On the Water magazine. And like we've done every week for the past 12 weeks, we're going to give you a quick recap of the migration last week before jumping into what's happened this week. Over the past week, the Northeast received its first real taste of summer weather. As a result, points south of southern New England began to see an exodus of stripers as they continued to migrate north in search of cooler, forage-rich waters. There are still some large stripers stationed off the south shore of Long Island, as well as in portions of the Long Island Sound, where bunker, butterfish, sand eels, and even mackerel are fueling big feeds. However, the full moon on Thursday may have sent some of those fish packing unless the buffet of bait sticks around. This week, we've seen the striper bite pick up a little bit along the river mouths in Connecticut, but much of the action remains over the reefs, where schools of smaller bait fish tend to congregate, as well as around those bunker schools that are pushing east through the Sound. Meanwhile, Rhode Island and Cape Cod saw a push of 40-pound bass that were chasing pogies outside Narragansett Bay and in Buzzards Bay, and the fishing remains good on the south side of the Cape and the Rips, where there's plenty of squid to go around. And north of Cape Cod, bass from slot size to the 40-pound class are blowing up on schools of bunker and mackerel. The migration may be winding down a bit to the south, but there's still plenty of action ahead for surf casters, kayakers, and boaters in New England, and more specifically, along the coast of Maine. All right, so our first guest this week is a well-known charter captain out of Portland, Maine. He's also the author of On the Water's Maine Fishing Planners in the New England edition of the magazine. Please welcome Captain Lou Tirado of Diamond Pass Outfitters. How you doing, Lou?
I'm good, man. Good to see you again.
Likewise, yeah. We saw each other back at the Mugs and Plugs event. I get what month was that? I forget. That was up in
Oh man, that was early. Was it like? Well, you guys, you and Jimmy were talking about ice fish, and so it had been
that was
February,
December.
March.
You're right. I
Yeah,
forget.
it was
I'm
early.
like the months have just flown by, so I can't believe
Yeah,
that was back in December now, and we're here we
right.
are 7 months later already.
Absolutely, it's wild.
Yeah, it's wild. But a lot has changed since then, obviously, with the whole striper migration having happened. And we're getting into the later stages of it. But for you guys, it's you still have a lot to look forward to up in
Yeah.
Maine. So, I know you had 40-inch class fish move into the southern portion of the state as early as mid-May. But what is
Hmm.
the most abundant class of fish that you're seeing now that we're already like through the
Yeah,
month?
I think it's probably that 2015 year class. We're seeing a lot of fish in like the 29 to 35 inch range.
Okay.
That seems to be the we saw a good push of like really big fish, like you said, in late May.
Yeah.
Some like 30 to 40 pound fish. Those seem to, I don't know if they moved up further up the coast, up towards the Kennebec or whatever, but
Yeah.
primarily we're seeing a lot of fish in just above that slot size and then way below it, in that like 18 to 22 inch range.
Well, that's good. That's good. I mean,
Yeah,
it
no, it
was
is.
a
It's
little
good to see.
concerning early on because everybody's seeing so many big fish at first, and usually there's some schoolies that are the first to arrive. But it's good to know that there are 18 to 20-inch class fish up by you guys.
Yeah, definitely. We also, you know what, like we were said before we got on here, it was kind of a grind the last few days, and I actually found a little pod of like micro bass,
Yeah.
which you never seen grown men so excited to catch these little fish that are like 10 inches long, but for multiple reasons, I was pretty jacked up to see them. So
Absolutely. And so do those fish have sea lice, or are you like, how do you guys tell the difference between like spawning populations from like the Kennebec and stuff? I know that's further north than you, but
yeah, I don't know. So everything I'm told about like the spawning, like the main fish that have spawned here, they're more of like a football shape, like
yeah,
real deep back, deep belly, kind of short, chunky things.
gotcha.
Um, these fish that we saw, they looked like your run of the mill like Chesapeake or Hudson fish. The fact that they maybe swam up here is wild. I
Yeah.
don't know. I really don't. And maybe there's a little hidden population spawning fish somewhere north of that I don't know about that
Yeah.
nobody's really seen. But these fish are tiny. But I don't know. I really don't know where they came from. They didn't
Yeah.
have any lights on them, but they did look fresh. They were bright silver. They didn't look like they'd been holding over in our
Right.
rivers or anything. So
Well, I mean, regardless of where they came from, like I said, it's great to see, smaller fish around. I mean,
absolutely,
it's
yeah.
the future of the fishery up there. So that's great. But, with those smaller fish around, and I know you got, some over slots and slot class fish now, but, how are you approaching targeting those fish this time of year? Are you still focusing on the rivers and the river mouths, or is it more of an oceanfront bite now?
Right now, I'm still in the rivers. Our rivers still have a ton of river herring and alewives in them, and then we've
Right.
also got, it just recently we got these little Brit herring that showed up, and then some other stuff that I can't really tell what it is. It's like a quarter of an inch long, so it's almost
Yeah.
comical right now what the boat looks like. There's stuff that is literally like that big, up to 10 inches long
Yeah,
that
right.
we're throwing. Depending on the pod of fish and where we are, that's what they're locked in on. Like
Yep.
I was out yesterday and these fish that it was a super technical bite. Like they were almost wrapped. It looked like you know their mouths, like half their mouth was out of water, and they were just kind of like skimming the surface.
Really.
What it was they were eating, I couldn't tell. It's almost translucent, but the smallest fly, little shrimp, like it's basically I was throwing. What was using was actually the mud dog, uh, like a D12 or something. It's like a little tiny shrimp fly in clear, basically
Yeah.
clear like fish hair, and it seemed to work. So I don't know if
Awesome.
they just hit the silhouette or what, but
Interesting.
yeah. So everything it goes from I'm in early. Um, we're fishing a lot of top waters. A lot of the new Albie Snack just came out with that new 7-inch version
Yes.
that they
Yeah, it's a
have. That
perfect
thing has
size.
been killer for river herring. Like it's such a versatile bait and it casts so well that you can fish it just under the surface, really darting, or you can slow it kind of like and give it that like musky or pike presentation where you kick it off like almost like a glider.
Right, right.
You give it that like side profile and trigger the fish to bite, or you can even work it on top if they're really super aggressive,
Yeah,
which has been
right. Those things are great. I mean, even the little 4-inch ones, they cast a mile. So, and I know they have the super snacks, which I think are like 9 or 10 inches, and those are great
yeah,
when they're on like full size squid down here on the Cape. But the 7-inch is such a good, like a 7-inch white one of those is such a perfect
yep,
match for river herring.
exactly.
I can imagine working it subsurface like a spook or on top, like you were saying,
It's
is
been
just
great
yeah,
and
absolutely
super
classic.
user friendly, which is the nicest thing. So I could hand it to
Definitely.
somebody and give them a quick little how to, and they're off and running. And I don't really have to coach them, which is ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so you got river herring up there still. That's good to know. I know you guys, that's a big part of your forage base in the
Yeah.
spring. But we've been talking a lot about bunker with our guests recently because they didn't really show up in numbers off of Long Island and Jersey like they normally do in June. I mean, they're there now in massive schools, but it was a late start for I would say the bunker populations on the certain parts of the coast. So I know
Yeah.
last year you guys had a good run of pogies up by you, but have you seen much of them so far this season?
They're just starting to push in now from offshore. I know that the main commercial season just opened last week,
Okay.
so the guys are just getting geared up. Excuse me. I know there's a big pile of them offshore, and we're starting to see some in like the areas like up around the Royal River, which
Okay.
is in Yarmouth, and then up in the Kennebec as well. They pushed in to the river, so the bass have been on those pretty heavy up there right now.
That's got to be a good time targeting big bass and skinny water and stuff like that with docks and
100%.
top waters. Yep,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
great.
But when they're locked in on those pogies, like at the Kennebec, they've got the special regulations, so there's no live bait. It's artificial
Oh,
and single hook only until the end of
really?
this month. So
Okay.
the
I'm
guys are
glad you brought
pulling
that
their
up. I
hair
did
out.
not know that.
Yeah, it's to protect the spawning class that's up there,
That makes
and it's
sense.
been in place. Oh, geez, since before I started fishing. That's 35 years ago. So,
Oh, so this is not a new thing.
but
Okay.
yeah, no, it's no, this is something that the Maine put in place years and years ago to try to
Gotcha.
protect that spawning class that goes on up there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that totally makes sense. So, I mean,
Yep.
but aside from bunker, what are some of the other bait fish? And I know you mentioned herring that you look for at this point in the season or as those bunker move in, does it really shift to like a pogey bite or you guys get a fair amount of mackerel up by you?
Oh, we have a pile of mackerel. I would say that mackerel is like the most prolific bait fish that we have and that people are using.
Awesome.
They're the easiest to get. Guys are live lining them. They'll chunk them off the beach and everything. And they're here usually right around Memorial Day, and they'll stay through October.
Okay.
So super easy to get. The bass love them. And that's besides that, we get a lot of sand eels, and then our green crabs and shrimp up in the flats and marshes and stuff.
Really? Okay. So do you do much of that? Like I've never really heard of people using green crabs to target stripers. I mean, I know a lot of guys down in like Long Island Sound will go tog fishing and they end up just
Mhm.
on a striper bite because they can't weed through the stripers. But that's
Right.
interesting that people use them up there.
Yeah, I've never actually used the green crab for striped bass, but I'm sure it will work. I know we use a lot of like green crab patterns with flies
Interesting.
and
Okay.
drag the flats and mud flats with them, and the bass absolutely hammer them.
I bet.
So it would stand to reason that a green crab would work. I don't know why I
Yeah.
just haven't done it, to be
Yeah, it's,
honest
it's
with you.
funny that you mentioned that. I remember seeing a video. It might have been the video Sims put out a few years ago, and it focused on people in around the Kittery area fishing the mud flats at super low tides. I can imagine a green crab fly especially would
Yeah,
excel in that
oh,
environment.
they kill them. They
Yeah,
love it.
So another thing I'm curious about is I know there's plenty of mackerel, and you said the pogies are moving in. So are the fish still pretty bait fish oriented, or are they kind of shifting to becoming more structure oriented with these rising water temps? You mentioned it's 86 degrees up there, so
It is, yeah. It's 86 degrees. The water temps have stayed relatively cool though. It's been
that's good.
somewhat cool. Right now I think it's only like 57 degrees out front.
Oh wow, okay,
So it's still pretty chilly. So yeah, they're definitely keyed in on bait fish right now. I haven't really noticed that whole like uptick of fish out on the ledge, just kind of like staging and doing those kind of things.
yeah,
But like you said, it's still early for us. Like I feel like our season, it kicked off early and then there was a lull, and now we're getting that wave of like what June should be. The
gotcha.
surface feeding and the birds and bass blowing bait through the water in the air. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where they're at right now.
Okay. And I mean, yeah, you mentioned the water degrees is 57, so water temperature is 57, and really like it seems like that magic window of top water is like 55 to 62 degrees. So you
Yeah,
guys
they
are right in the middle of that window, so I can imagine the action's been pretty good on top.
been very good. Yeah, they get snappy and they're happy to do it. So
Yeah,
we're happy to
absolutely.
oblige.
Yeah. And so, real quick, I meant to ask you, going back to the bunker, I'm curious if you think that the lack of bunker to the south might have brought some of those overslot fish into your area earlier in the season, because if you got to imagine if they're not seeing the amount of bunker on, on their journey up the coast, that you have to imagine they're going to keep passing or keep pressing
Yeah,
north until they find like a more rich food source.
I would imagine. I mean, if they're a slave to their stomach, and it's their, input, what are they going to get for reward versus how much they're going to, put for energy, put
Yeah.
it out for. And if they're not seeing what they want down there, they're going to keep moving. If there's
Yeah.
nothing holding them, they're going to keep moving.
Exactly. Exactly.
Like I know guys on the vineyard right now, the squid bite's good, and the ribs.
Yeah.
So the bass are going to stay there. And I think we just had a push of, our rivers, like I said, I've got full of herring. And we just had a fresh push of fish come in today that were happy to eat herring, and
Yeah.
once they find what they're looking for, they'll go. And I think they'll stay there as long as they can.
Yeah.
If they're
Definitely.
not seeing the big bunker down there, that's what those big fish are going to want.
Yeah.
They're
And
going
it's
to move
funny,
to
those, I
something
mean, those
else.
fish, when they first arrived, I mean, water's 57 now, so it must have been ice cold when they got there in mid-May still. But if you got the
Yeah,
bait, they're gonna eat.
yeah. I think the first fish we got was right around Mother's Day, and the water temp was like 46.
Wow.
Yeah, it was cold.
Yeah, it's a little cold. I used to be a kayak instructor with LL Bean, and we had to do like test swims, early on in May, because we
Hmm.
started our season on the Long Island Sound, and the end of May, Memorial Day, is when we started up the summer kayak guided
Yep.
trips. And man, flipping a kayak in like 53-degree water without a wetsuit on and
It's
having to
no
like
joke.
climb back into it and bail yourself out, it's no joke. So
No
46
joke.
degrees is cold water, even for those stripers to be feeding in.
Yeah, absolutely. But they're
Yep.
tough, man. They're hardy fish, like just the fact that the swim that they make every year, twice a year, is insane. So
Yeah. Yeah.
they're hardy.
And this weekend, I mean, they'll have a little help pushing up towards you guys with those full moon, the residual full moon tides. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, what do you anticipate that those residual full moon tides will bring to the striper bite in Maine this weekend?
Yeah. I'm hoping it's going to keep making things a little better. We're going to get those higher tides. I think we're looking at, like, in my area, it's like like a 10-2 or 10-3,
Okay.
foot swing.
Yeah.
So it's like a 9-6, 9-7. So we're going to get like a extra half foot,
Yeah.
which is just a lot more water. We're going to get a lot more moving water, which usually gets those fish going, because it jacks the bait up and they can't really handle it as well. But those bass thrive
Totally.
and they can really pin and push that bait where they want it to go. So I'm hoping that we see some more fish push up with this warmer weather, and they're going to have all kinds of bait and extra water to play in, and things should be good for the weekend.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the whole foot and a half tide swing, because that might bring stripers into much shallower areas where the
100%.
not necessarily submerged structure right now, but a few days from now you might find them in these shallow rock beds and stuff, just
Yep.
picking away at crabs or whatever else they might find in there.
Crabs,
So
sandworms, shrimp,
yeah,
everything's going to get washed off those banks.
yeah, that's a great opportunity, especially for I know you're a fly guy, so I can imagine you'll be spending some time targeting those boulder fields and stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Lou, the last thing I like to ask our guests is if you could give striped bass anglers in Maine one piece of parting advice this week, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a good one. I like that. And I'm a conservation guy, so just take care of the fish, please. Like
Yeah.
everybody knows that it's not the greatest, outlook on the stock right now, but go fishing, have fun, but just take an extra second and think about if you're from shore, where am I going to land it and where am I going to release it? And if you're in a boat, it doesn't take any energy to just kind of lean over the gunnel instead of flopping the thing on the deck. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like,
Right.
just take care of the fish, please. Like, we try. Everybody, nobody's perfect. I get it. It's fine, but just try
Yeah.
and have a lot of fun with it and save it for tomorrow. Trying to make it good for tomorrow, man. That's
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, I mean, if we can all do our part and take care of those fish, you guys still have pretty temperate waters up there, so releasing them in good conditions a little bit easier than for the people down south. So that's
100%.
definitely a point for people, to the south of, I would say, southern New England down to Jersey. If you've still got bass in your area, take a little extra care reviving them. Like you
Yep.
said, lean over the gunnel, get a lip grip in there, drag them, revive them through the water, and make sure
Yep.
they're good to go before you let
But
them
yeah, have
free.
fun. Just have fun and treat it right and think about tomorrow. It's not just today.
Exactly. That's perfect. I love it. All right. Well, Lou, hey, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate you jumping on. I know you
Absolutely.
probably had a busy morning out on the water and you might have another
Yeah.
charter to
Well,
get
thanks
back
for
to.
calling,
So,
dude. I appreciate it. I love this stuff.
yeah, man, anytime. We're happy to do it.
All right.
And best of luck to you and all your charters for the rest of the spring, man. I hope it's good to you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
All right, Lou, we'll talk to you, man.
I mean, see you.
All right. Big thanks to Captain Lou Tirado of Diamond Pass Outfitters in Portland, Maine, for filling us in on the striper migration in his neck of the woods this week. Like Lou said, anglers in Maine have a lot to look forward to for the remainder of June and into early July. With trophy class fish still moseying north and the last of the big bass making their way out of the Hudson River, things are looking up for anglers in northern New England, while much of the coast sees stripers slowly settle into their summer patterns. There's a ton of bait, including mackerel, herring, and bunker, for those fresh arrivals to enjoy in New Hampshire and Maine, not to mention the cool water temperatures that should have bass fired up and feeding on top under the right conditions. Now, that being said, there's still some great striper fishing ahead for anglers in southern New England, particularly around Buzzards Bay, Cape Cod Bay, the outer beaches, and the islands. All right, so our second guest this week is my friend and coworker here at On the Water. He's a young captain, a striped bass fishing nut, and whiz behind the camera lens. Please welcome Captain Robbie Tartaglia. What's up, Robbie?
How's it going, Matt?
All right, man. How are you?
Doing good. Waiting for this southwest wind to chill out a little bit so we can kind of get back after it here. But
Dude, I know. It's been pretty
yeah,
brutal. Somebody turned the fan on and it has not shut off for like 3.5 days now. It's brutal.
yeah. I mean, I know some other people aren't complaining too much because it's been really hot, but I'd rather have heat and be able to fish than a 20-mile-an-hour southwest wind for 4 days straight. So
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see how
it's
it looks.
definitely not easy. I mean, you especially, like, I know you fish, you focus most of your striper fishing on Buzzards Bay, and you and your father seem to have that fishery like very dialed in. So can you kind of run through what the striper fishing in the Bay looks like this week in terms of size, class, abundance, and what they're feeding on, like despite the wind, if you've been out at all?
Yeah, so last time I was out, today is Wednesday. I was out Monday morning. And it was, man, it's been looking a lot better every day since we'll call it the past couple weeks.
Yeah.
Because in previous, this is I'm 23 years old, and this is my 17th season fully fishing Buzzards Bay with my father on our boat tag team. So we've been fishing the area for a long time. We keep very close tabs on, kind of the year-to-year patterns of what goes on, the time periods of when the bigger class of fish starts to show up in certain areas, when the pogies really start to show up.
Yeah.
So this year it kind of seemed like things were a little bit behind. The past couple of weeks, there's been big fish around, but the lack of big bait has, kind of made it a little more difficult. But in the past week, as before this wind really kicked on, all the bunker have been starting to pour in big groups, mixed size too. I've been getting, when I've been throwing the cast on them, I've been getting mixed sizes of the real small ones and the real big ones, which I've noticed is a little bit different this year compared to last year. Specifically, it was
For
a lot
sure.
of just big bunker. So it was really good. A lot of the upper bay areas are just chock full of bunker. All the backwater, coves, marinas, estuaries like that. A lot of those areas are holding big groups of bunker right now, which is no secret because you can't miss them when you're driving around. They're just
Yeah.
in big groups right now. So it's good to see those. I think they're really rolling in about a week later than they did last year, which is, I was getting a little worried for a little bit there. I was like, okay, it might be more of a lack of bait type of year, which, the bunker movement's different every year, that.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, they rolled in heavy numbers this past week. to a lot of the specific areas, which is now kind of turning the bite on for the big fish a little bit more. The big fish have been around. There's more coming in, which is good too, but they've been kind of, a little more finicky this year because of that lack of big bait. But now I'm rolling into these areas and I'm seeing the bigger fish, come up every few minutes or so and blow up on a pot of bunker or whatever. So the fish are a lot more active. It gets me back to throwing the plug more, which is great.
There you go.
So, as of late, with the lack of bigger bait, they're a little bit more wary to the plugs and all that. So when the bigger bait rolls in and they're more active, it's a lot easier to throw the dock around and get more commits. But yeah, there's a lot of big fish rolling in now to the upper bay areas as well as those bunker.
Yeah, definitely. I know Kevin was out on his kayak earlier this week. He was snagging bunker and live lining him, and that seems to be kind of the thing to do right now if you're a kayak fisherman, at least, because you have a little bit of a limited range compared to being out on a world cat like you and your dad are. So but it's great. They're piled into all the marinas, and that was a common theme this year is that the bunker kind of didn't show up, and that's not just up here. They took their time showing up off the south shore of Long Island. They're in Long Island Sound now, and we can only imagine those fish are going to continue to push north with stripers hot on their tails. So
for sure.
I mean, it seems like things are still warming up a little bit, even though we're heading towards the tail end of the migration a little bit.
Yeah, and we got the full moon coming in this week. I think the exact full moon date is early next week, like Monday or Tuesday.
No, it's actually it's this Thursday. So by the time this airs, we'll be a day into the full moon. Exactly.
Yeah. So the full moon is like 2 or 3 days behind of what it was last year.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been kind of keeping that mentality this year. Like, okay, it's a couple extra days behind. Father's Day weekend is usually our best weekend in Buzzards Bay every year. And we definitely, I had my best morning in a couple years on Monday morning, which was awesome to see. So it was a couple days behind, which is awesome. And the great thing, going back to the kayak thing, when you're finding these pods of bunker in the upper bay, if you're limited and you're not on a boat or whatever, you're on a kayak or a smaller whatever, there's been a lot of fish on all these pods of bunker this year, which I've been noticing, whether it's big bluefish or it's bass. So usually if you're in a backwater area and you find a big pod of bunker, the fish aren't far behind. Whether you're snagging, I encourage you to snag them, put them on a circle hook or whatever, do that thing. Or if you have a net, obtain whatever poties you can get and then kind of bring them over to wherever, as a bass fisherman, whatever looks good. You're looking for flats that are close to deep water. You're looking for rock piles. You're looking, for slicks on the surface where, fish could have been pushing around, stuff like that. So, it's cool because this year, more than past years, I'm seeing a lot of activity on these pods of bunker. Not every pod is going to have fish on them. You'll pick up on them quick based off how the pod's moving around and getting chased up and stuff like that. But more often than not, in these areas, there's fish not too far behind. I actually threw the cast net on a big group the other day, and I cast netted like a 36-inch bass by accident in the net.
No way.
So yeah, so they're mixed in, and then there's definitely a lot of big bluefish around too. I know you like to catch some big blues, so there is access to those around the big bunker pods, which I've known because my bunker have been coming back chopped in half when I'm throwing them live. So
yeah, and the bluefish is another indicator, like that. When they're feeding on those bunker, they will absolutely create that slick that you're talking about, and the slick you're looking for. So that's one of those keys that's going to indicate where the fish are for you. But because water temperatures are warming up, eventually those bunker are going to push out of a lot of these backwaters and these marinas. So Buzzards Bay water temps are definitely starting to climb, but and as our vineyard in Nantucket Sounds, and because Buzzards Bay is one of those like fish highways, because of its proximity to the Cape Cod Canal, how do you stay on the bass bite in the bay as the summer conditions start to set in those bunker, kind of move out of those shallower areas?
Yeah, so one of the best thing, the most important thing to pay attention to as our water temps are rising, especially as we get into July, and it kind of compares and contrasts with what's going on now. Right now, we still have the migration happening. So the incoming, a lot of what goes on with our fishery in Buzzards Bay is the Hog Island Channel, which comes all the way through Buzzards Bay and into the canal. So that's like the highway that the bass will ride, from Rhode Island, wherever they're coming from, through New Bedford into Buzzards Bay. The tide pushes super heavy through that channel, all the way through Buzzards Bay into the canal. So this time of the year, you're really paying attention to that incoming tide. The fish are going to move in and out of Buzzards Bay through that channel. And then they're going to, kind of split off into their different flats and coves and stuff like that. So this time of year, you want to really try to focus your efforts on that incoming tide that's coming into the canal and pushing everything in.
True.
And that water temp is still good and the fish are coming in. As we get into July and the water temps get really hot in Buzzards Bay, you're going to want to fish the outgoing tide. That cooler Cape Cod Bay water that's coming out of the canal and coming out of Cape Cod Bay through the east end of the canal to the west end of the canal, that's going to be pushing cooler water into Buzzards Bay, and that's going to get a lot more fish active. And that's when we start to see the mackerel bites start to happen.
Okay.
In that July timeframe when the water temps are warmer here, but the cool water is pouring out of the canal into Buzzards Bay from Cape Cod Bay and flushing those mackerel, into the west end of the canal and into different upper Buzzards Bay areas. So that's something you're going to want to focus your time and efforts on as the water temps rise in Buzzards Bay for sure. And that's one of my favorite bites each year. I love the big bunker stuff. That's usually when you catch your biggest bass of the year in our areas. But the most fun I have, especially on the fly, because fly fishing is usually priority for me when I can do it, is when those mackerel get flushed out of the canal into our side of the bay there with that cooler Cape Cod Bay water. Because you get big fish that are super active, blowing mackerel out of the water. Being a photographer myself and videographer, those are some of my favorite days to go out there with my camera, capture some cool moments. So yeah, definitely pay attention to that outgoing tide as the water temps start to rise in Buzzards Bay. Sure.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the fact that kind of starts to happen in early July, because last year I can remember there was just an absolutely bonkers canal bite with exactly what you were talking about. The west end, anywhere from like Bourne Bridge all the way out to the end of the canal, it was just loaded with mackerel, and you had bass up to 40 pounds blowing them clean out of the water. It was a spectacle, and that's hopefully, fingers crossed, hopefully that's going to happen again this year.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm hoping for it. That's my favorite bite to get on. So yeah, I'm excited for that for sure.
Well, it's coming. So, but we got the residual full moon tides going into the weekend. So how do you think that will impact striper fishing in Buzzards Bay and around other parts of the Cape as well?
So the full moon, it gets fish moving. I don't know if you remember I'm sure you do, but that Plymouth bite that happened 2 or 3 years ago. 2 years ago now?
It was 2 years ago, yeah.
It's all mixed together. But I was there the day that it all ended after 2 months of it. And I had been there multiple times, fishing it a ton with my buddies or whatever. And then the one day I brought a couple of friends with me that have never caught a striper before. I'm like, oh, we're going to go crush them. You guys are going to have fun. One thing in the back of my mind is like, oh, it's a full moon today. I wonder how that will affect it. We got there and sure enough, everything was gone.
Yeah.
There was some bunker there, but what happened was the full moon, this was in July. This is kind of a different moon, but still speaks to the effect of the moon.
Oh, absolutely.
All those fish had moved back towards the canal. The moon finally, pushed everything back that way. And when I was running through the canal to go to Plymouth from Buzzards Bay that morning, I was noticing some fish blowing up in the canal every once in a while. And I saw canal guys hooked up. I'm like, oh, interesting. Little did I know in the back of my head, I should have thought more. I was like, oh, these are all the fish coming back from the Plymouth bite. So the full moon will get fish to move that haven't really decided to move yet. And it'll kind of push them out. And to go back to Buzzards Bay, what usually happens with the full moon, and specifically the June moon, is everything's going to kind of come out of the areas they've been hanging in, specifically the big bass, and they're going to start following the bunker through into the canal and making their way north. So that's usually what happens in the June moon, but we do refill with fresh fish when those fish are leaving, because that moon is pushing fish in from Rhode Island,
right,
and south and towards us. So the interesting thing about Buzzards Bay is the fish aren't coming here to hang out for the year. The fish that we get in Buzzards Bay, they're coming in to rest from their migration. That's why I'm reiterating from earlier with the whole thing, looking for flats close to deep water, is, they want to follow the bunker, and they also want to find areas that they can just hang out, digest, relax, be near bait. Yeah, set up for before they move into the canal and continue their journey north. Basically, Buzzards Bay is like a giant rest stop for big striped bass and striped bass in general. It's one of those places where through that whole entire East Coast migration, Buzzards Bay is one of those places where they love to just stop for a few days, be near a bunker if they can. They'll feed. They definitely will, especially if there's big bunker around and other types of bait. But mainly it's a place for them to kind of hold up for a minute before they continue their move north. So usually around the June moon, we've had a few weeks of these bigger fish pushing in here, and then you'll see them start to kind of flow out and back into that channel and make their way into the canal and go north, whereas there's more fish coming here into the bay as well. So it's a cool concept.
I like the analogy you made, based, about the Buzzards Bay being a truck stop basically for big bass on their way up the coast. Because even though it is a fish highway and you've got those incoming tides that are going to force them through the canal, it's got so much rocky structure in comparison to other places, around Cape Cod, like Vineyard Sound, Nantucket Sound, even Cape Cod Bay, especially. And those big boulder fields are what, will, if there's not a lot of bunker around, will hold bass or
Exactly.
until that next full moon or new moon tide. So
Yeah.
great analogy there in terms of, it's not only a fish highway, but there's these different areas that you can target these fish as they're on
100%.
on their migration up the coast.
I like to think of it as one of those rest stops where you see where there's like 7 different fast food restaurants in it.
Yeah, yeah.
So they pull up in the
I-95.
rest stops, but there's like 10 different options for them to go hang out in and,
Yep.
and refeed and stuff like that. But yeah, Buzzards Bay, man, you look for those flats that are close to deep water places. I compare it to largemouth bass fishing a lot of ways, those transition areas where it's like,
Yeah.
they can swim right out of a channel, out of 50 feet of water, right up into 5 to 10 feet of water, not have to go far, and look for the bait too. So
Yeah,
it's really
absolutely.
cool. It's a fun place to fish and search around.
It is. It is. And I know you're a big fly guy. You're one of the feather boys in the office. So do you have any techniques for like fly fishermen that will help them excel when water temps, kind of start to shoot up into the upper 60s and low 70s?
Yeah. So there's 2 ways to really target them. And I wrote about it in an article in our June issue.
Yes.
And that's finesse and power. Those are the 2 best ways to get a chance at catching a big bass on the fly. The finesse type of approach is what I get a chance of doing a lot in Buzzards Bay, which is looking into those flats that are close to the deep water on calm days. You'll be able to find them finning on the surface. Like, some people say they're digesting, some people say they're just kind of milling there. I think it's a mix of both. They're just there, and that's taking the finesse approach, a little bit lighter line, smaller fly, and being quiet and getting as close as you can to those groups of milling fish and making the right cast. You'll see them, if you're looking in the right areas, just kind of using your eyes, you'll see the funny water, you'll see the fish moving around. That's a great chance to go sight fish the biggest bass of your life. Keep that finesse presentation.
Right.
Use, try to match the hatch, but man, the kinky muddler, there's no secret now that fly is just, it's the dock of flies, I like to say. It just gets bit. Big game changers do well when you're around pogies and stuff like that. And then the second approach is the power technique, which is where, you really want to locate the feeds. You want to locate those groups of fish, feeding on bunker, feeding on mackerel, focus on just having the right, more powerful gear, your 10 to 12 weight rods where, you can fight that fish in deeper water. You can fight that big fish around structure, all that kind of stuff. Right. But you're more focused on just, making the right cast into the feeds and, setting the hook home and doing that. So it's kind of a mix of the 2 there around this time of the year. But my favorite way to get them is that finesse technique, where it's just where you're seeking out these groups of bigger fish and you're getting as close as you can to them and making the right cast. It's definitely feels like a hunt, and it's a lot of fun. Trolling motors help a lot for that. I don't have a trolling motor, so you can do it without them. And it just takes, take a long engineless glide, get up on your RPMs a little bit, pick your line, and kind of like you're a battleship intercepting another battleship or whatever it may be, however you want to compare it. Come off, turn your engines off, glide to them, and make the right cast. So it's a lot of fun to do that. And it's cool, man. There's some good opportunity to catch some really big fish on the fly in Buzzards Bay for sure, especially in that July time frame, which is a time that a lot of people overlook for that, which is when those mackerel bites happen.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, and then that happens towards the tail end of the spring migration. So, as that kind of starts to happen, I know you said you'll stick around Buzzards Bay for a little while, but does your approach change? When do you go anywhere else? Like, do you target fish in Cape Cod Bay? And if so, how does your approach change? Because the 2 bodies of water are pretty drastically different in terms of like depth, structure, and all that. So
yeah, so I love fishing Cape Cod Bay because there's not a lot of people that do it on light tackle and in the spin and targeting. Like my friend Matt Foley that lives up there in Situate, there's a lot of guys where there'll be a top water bite happening up there and they're just trolling X wraps through it, which gives, guys like me and Matt and other guys like us that are trying to, go cast at fish an opportunity to kind of have those groups of fish to ourselves up there. So I absolutely love going that way. Cape Cod Bay is really fun because when you find the fish and there's bait around, it can make for some of those epic mornings your entire life. So I love going that way into, end of July and August. I love fishing Boston Harbor. I love it up there because the abundance of bait is really cool when they really get thick up there. And then the way the fish feed, they're aggressive, they're pelagic like big broomtail fish. They're super clean, a lot different than our Buzzards Bay fish that are coming up through shallow water the whole way. Those Boston Harbor, South Shore fish are coming in from deep water. They're pristine. They fight really hard. They're clean fish. So I love going up there and getting on some good bites, you know, in the later summer months for sure.
Definitely. And you mentioned that a lot of those fish are coming in from the ocean where there's, different forage bases from sea herring to mackerel to sand eels. And that's something that definitely doesn't happen as much in terms of the sand eels. That doesn't happen as much in Buzzards Bay as it does in Cape Cod Bay. Like Cape Cod Bay in the summer, if you're marking those thick schools of sand eels and you're dropping diamond jigs, you're almost always going to find a couple fish that are willing to take them. So
yeah, for sure. Another thing I'll talk about too, my second favorite fishery in the entire world behind Buzzards Bay is Monomoy. Off chatting, I got my two best friends go out of the Bass River, so I have I'm privileged to be able to go explore that fishery. I've been fishing Monomoy since I was probably 5 or 6 years old, jumping on board with Captain Allen from Gotthschreiber Charters and various other captains up that way, along with my best friends. And one thing I will say about Monomoy is, man, that place is getting better and better every single year. The past 5 years, it's the average size fish has just gone up like 5 inches every year. Last year was just a banner year for Monomoy. Big squid, a lot of bait there all year long. And it was like, when it was good, you were catching upwards of 40, 15-pound fish a day. It was just really good. And then it just didn't stop all the way through the fall. The best day I had out there all year was, I think it was November 18th, almost going into December.
Wow.
Not a single boat out there. No one else was out there. It was awesome. There was a ton of bait around, big fish. It was a lot of fun. So I'm excited. My friends have already been over there a few times and absolutely crushed it. I've just been busy down this way. I'm going to get up there early next week if I can for sure. I know it's going really good. All the rips are holding fish. And one thing I'd say too is, the deeper rips are going to be your chance at bigger fish, and the shallow rips are going to be your chance at a lot of the action. So I love going up there, especially when the big squid are in. It's a ton of fun on the fly, consistent action, great place to go book a trip with your family. If you want to go out and just have a fun day of catching, there's tons of captains that go out of Chatham and that whole area out that way. It's a really, really fun place to fish, and it's a special place for sure too. So I think it's definitely one of our top striped bass fisheries on the East Coast. And if it's not yet, it's definitely going to be up there very soon, just for East Coast wide. So it's getting better every year, and I love to see it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Monomoy because, we have all this talk of, Cape Cod, Buzzards Bay rather being a fish highway, but a lot of those fish are going to, veer off for the Rips and Vineyard and Nantucket Sounds. When they do, they're going to take that longer route. They're not going to go back into Buzzards Bay. They're going to keep pressing out along those outer Cape beaches. And I can attest to, the fact that in the middle of the summer last year, when all those fish were finished in Monomoy, feeding on squid, they're super plump, they're super fat. And on the outer Cape, those beaches just lit up in the middle of the summer with fish up to like 35 pounds. And, they were blowing up on mackerel, they were blowing up on sand eels. And that is such a fantastic place to fish. Like I don't spend a lot of time on the boat. So, I get down towards Monomoy, I fish the surf a lot, but man, like I have a feeling we're going to see a repeat of last year and even the year before that with those late migrators coming up from the Hudson and then staging in the rips for a while and taking a long, slow roll up the East Coast, up the outer Cape rather. And feeding on everything from squid to mackerel and sand eels. So hoping for a repeat of that the same way you're hoping for those mackerel to come out of the canal,
For sure, man. I'm excited for it. So lots to still look forward to,
Oh yeah.
It's just crazy how we're halfway through June already. It's wild.
I know. It's unbelievable. Time just is kind of flying by. But Robbie, you've given some great advice already so far this whole call. But one thing I like to do with all of our guests is, if you could give striped bass anglers around Cape Cod and the south coast of Massachusetts one piece of parting advice this week, what do you think it would be?
One piece of any kind of advice.
Yeah, like it could be super generic or it could be super focused on like fly, whatever
And
you think
I gotta say, this is something I've always utilized, and something I always speak on. And when I have, other people in my boat, I always tell them to use them. It's these things right here. Your eyes are the best tool you have as an angler. Always keep your eyes open. Be looking for new things. I've been fishing Buzzards Bay for 17 years. And every single year I find a new area or I find a new spot, because like literally a couple days ago, I was on my way to one of my other spots and I was just looking around and I just was kind of scanning in an area I don't usually pay attention to. And I just saw a ton of funny water in there. And I kind of poked in, explored it. I'm like, there's some really good structure in here. I've never really looked in here before. And sure enough, there was like a whole school of 15 to 25 pound bass in there. So, even if you've been fishing your areas for a long time, there's guys that have been fishing their areas a lot longer than me. It's always important to use your eyes, keep an open mind when you're fishing, and kind of don't be afraid to explore new stuff.
Absolutely. That's a great piece of parting advice, man. I totally agree. Use your eyes, and other senses come into play too. A lot of the times people say you can smell bluefish, so if you're looking for those chum slicks from the bunker and stuff, keep your eyes and your ears and your nose open as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you can smell the bunker too. My dad says it all the time. He's like, I can smell them.
Absolutely.
Sure that's not your breakfast or something like that?
I hope his breakfast smells a little bit better than bunker.
I'm a full believer in it, though. You can definitely smell them, especially when there is a lot of bait around. You can tell with your nose on calm days too, specifically. But
yeah, absolutely.
Use your eyes for sure.
All right, awesome. Well, hey, Robbie, thanks again for jumping on here, man. Best of luck for the rest of the spring run, and I hope to share a couple tides with you soon, dude.
Absolutely, dude. We'll make it happen.
All right. Thanks a lot, bud. Take care.
Yeah, no problem, man. Take it easy.
Okay, thanks again to both Robbie Tartaglia and Lou Tirado for joining us to discuss the striper migration around the June full moon. Like Robbie and Lou both touched on, there's still plenty of good striper fishing ahead. Just because the migration is winding down in some areas of the coast and we're heading into our final week of striper migration reports doesn't mean that you should stop striper fishing. What it does mean, however, is that striper patterns are changing, so it may require a little more work to find them some days. And with water temperatures rising as we approach the tail end of the migration, it also means we need to handle these fish with care and release them in a healthy condition. Stripers will continue to press north toward Maine, but with these full moon tides, you can bet there will be a fresh batch of fish in your area sometime over the next week, whether you're fishing in Long Island Sound or up in Cape Cod Bay. So don't forget to sign up for On the Water Striper Cup. It's our 20-week catch and release based striper fishing tournament, and you can win prizes from Yeti, Penn, Bubba, Turtle Box Audio, and Costa Sunglasses just for catching fish and submitting your photos at stripercup.com. That's all the time we have for this week. Thanks again for watching, and be sure to check back next week for one final striper migration report from On the Water.